good afternoon, and welcome to Showcase 2030. This is our last segment, but do we have a lot in store for you? So let's not rush into it too fast. Let's just take a moment here. Just a moment. You and me, let's take a moment to just breathe a little bit, shall we? Because I know it's been quite the afternoon. I know there's been masterclasses, there's been workshops, there's been learnings and trainings and all of that. So let's just breathe. Let's just center ourselves and let's be ready, because this afternoon we're going to be talking about cement. We're going to be talking about coral reefs. We're going to be talking about quite a few things, and I cannot wait for the roundtables, the lightning talks, and so much more. I hope you're excited. Now, earlier today, this morning section, we did talk about tech for dev. And so I have got another video to show you from a grantee, and then I'll roll on with our next speaker. So let's watch that first, and I'll tell you about this afternoon's plan.
My goal was to be able to build bridges between Switzerland and Colombia, my two countries. And for 5 years, we've been working with social leaders in Colombia and academic partners that are Universidad de los Andes. So we have two main actors that are local in Bogota and Medellin. Here in Switzerland, we have this mindset of, okay, we need something, we go to the pharmacy or we go to an expert and we find it. In Colombia, there is nothing formal in this specific topic of disabilities. Everything is or very expensive or doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So with 3D printing, it was the perfect solution, because we can print what we want that could be tailor-made. And Felipe is helping us to really understand the need of disabled people in the field.
And the idea is then to take this plastic waste and ideally almost ask people to bring a certain number of bottles of PET or whatever. And then these could be shredded and then re-melted and made into a 3D printing filament.
Generally, the science focus on quality, high performances and so on, but in our case, maybe we can also accept to have sometimes a bit less resistant materials, because we just need to have something affordable and easy to find for the people. He helps us a lot also to understand what is available during the process, what is the infrastructure we need to have in order to reach our goals. So it's really an interesting collaboration to have that. We have basically two main steps. The first one is to develop a good polymeric material, so focusing really on the plastic side. And the second part is to add this agricultural waste inside it. So we are now able to print some simple pieces with recycled PET. And then our next goals is to add fillers in that.
And our colleagues in Colombia, instead of using recycled PET, they also worked on recycled polypropylene, which is another waste that you would find in the caps, for example. Mm-hmm. And so they also, in parallel, seeing some interesting effects, because adding this polypropylene is super difficult to print, but adding these fillers also helps, to some extent, the material to be less difficult to print.
All right, everybody. So let me remind you that we want to make this as interactive as possible, right? So in the Slido bar, which in some computers is on this side and other computers on that side, on some tablets and mobile devices is below me. So please find the Slido integration. Let's make this interactive. This morning, there were some questions, but I think we can do more, because I know there's tons of you watching, and hopefully the content is thought-provoking and it's creating avenues for you to get involved. So use the Slido section and put the questions in. And it's lovely to see some of you already putting your comments in there. So also let you know, at the end of today, I want to know what some of your learnings are. So along the way, if there are things that really stand out, quotes that people are saying, ideas that people are sharing, put that in there as well, so we can read out some of those and share some of our learnings. Okay, so with that, our next gentleman Worked in the watch industry for about 10 years. He's a serial entrepreneur before turning into the public and private sector. He did his PhD at EPFL. He's a founder of Fustic Association, which is dedicated to the future of sustainable cities and territories. For more on that, and with a Q&A with you, is now Frederic. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be there. So just before to start, I will show you a video with some key facts about cities and territories. You have to know that today, half of the humanity lives in cities. 70 million people migrate to cities every year, and by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in cities. Cities also consume 80% of the world resources and produce most of the world waste. Cities are also responsible for 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emission, and cities use 80% of the world energy. Climate change undermines resilience and disrupts totally lives in the cities. Each year, more than 3 million people die of disease triggered by air pollution. But we can be optimistic also. Cities are really a hub of innovation opportunities. They are really a living lab. On our side also, cities in 2050 will account more than 80% of the global GDP. And finally, digitalization can reinvent the futures of cities. Due to this fact, we can also say that in the agenda of the 2030 for the SDGs cannot be achieved without local actions in our cities in Switzerland. In that way, our faculty ENAC on environment, architecture and civil engineering decided to set up and to found an association called Fustic for the future sustainable territories, infrastructures and cities. In some keywords, the association is really, the goal of the association is really to raise awareness and to bring awareness to support innovation, to promote and to reward all innovation around the areas of cities, territories and infrastructures. It's kind of the Russian dolls. You have globally the territories. Inside the territories, you have the cities, you have the infrastructures for sure, but in middle of everything, you have the citizenship, you have the humanity. The idea also of the association is really to work on a project mode and to bring different stakeholders around the table and to think about these desirable futures and what is the next generation of sustainable cities and how we can co-create all together. The concept is quite easy. It's really to work on process oriented and to work in cross organization, different culture, different expertise, different profiles around the table in order to develop and to support through digitalization and also best practices, new products and services with an impact on sustainable future for our cities and territories. Our mission is really also to unlock the full potential of digitalization. Today, we are talking about blockchain and NFT. We are talking about artificial intelligence. The idea of the association also is really to bring awareness on how these digital tools can help on the development of the cities and territories with a huge impact on citizenship, society, and sustainability. Also, about that, the idea is really to have a quite unifying ecosystem, as I said, is to really to connect the people together and to work in collective intelligence, to join industries, governments, public and private sectors, citizens, academias also, and also NGOs and regulators. The idea also is really to inspire through the association a culture of innovation and transformation and to bring ideas to solutions on concrete new product services and best practices. The idea also is really to connect the digital and physical worlds. As we know today, we are in Zoom and sometimes it's better to see each other. How we can do that? It's really to unlock the potential of digitalization and how digital tools can help on different topics on communications, constructions, mobility and so on. And it will bring new business model, new product, new services. As we said in communication, repetition is reputation, but again, we can boost this co-creation altogether by cooperation, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity. Now coming back to the topic, bring around inside the association, we really want to work in a systemic and holistic approach, and we have different sub-themes linked to the circular economy, how we can be better, for example, for the building environment, for the constructions, how we can be better also for the urban health, the well-being in the building, what is the impact also on the climate change, how we can be better on the water energy nexus, the mobility, and as you can see, all these topics are all interconnected and have have an impact all together, one with the other one. The idea, you can see as a satellite, we will use digital tools like digital twin, data science for sure. As you know, we are producing millions of data per day in each cities. And the idea is really also to work on the modelization of systems. For example, to see what is the impact on the air quality, mobility, noise reduction in the city, the impact on the health for the citizenship. Also, we will, for sure, in any time, on any case, when we are talking about digital tools, we want to see what is the impact on the sustainability on the society. So we really want to work in collective intelligence to evaluate what is the life cycle assessment of the technology, to integrate also sociologists in the family of the Fustic, and to work also on biodiversity. Just coming back to that, just as an information, we applied a few months ago to be eligible for a national thematic network and to have a visibility nationally through this national thematic network called Cities and Territories Living Lab. And the idea is really to get a financement for 4 years from the Confederation in order to support and to help us in the development of the actions and the services provided by the Fustic Association as a leading house. And we collected more than 120 letters of intent from different entities, from the public and the private sectors, big corporates, startups, and also NGOs. So if you want to know more about this association and you want to jump and to join us, don't hesitate to contact me directly on my email, frederic.dreyer@epfl.ch. Thank you.
Frederic, thank you so much for taking us through that. Excellent presentation there. Now, we do have some questions coming in already. So are you ready for those questions, Frederic? Can I throw them at you?
Yes.
Excellent. So the first question that comes in is, can you give an example of some of the solutions and projects that Fustic is working on right now?
Yes, one example, you have different territories in Switzerland, and for example in Geneva, on the cities, the cities is totally moving in a new direction in order to integrate nature and city to develop an habitat for everybody. And the idea is really to work together, for example, to reopen some rivers to integrate the nature and to see what will be the impact for the urban health, the quality of the air, the noise reduction. And using that, for example, we have some startups also involved in the association, working on the collection of data, and to work with data scientists on data retrieval, data management, and to produce, I will say, algorithm in order to make predictive and prescriptive models to help also the governments or the public policy to better integrate new rules or laws in order to optimize the life being, I will say, in the city. So there is lots of concrete projects in Switzerland, in Lausanne, in Lucerne, in Zurich, where the cities really want to jump and to use the new technologies and to better understand what is the impact on how they can use this technology for a better well-being, I will say, of the citizens.
Okay. And is there any kind of ranking of different cities and territories as to how well they're aligning with, I guess, the standards of the future that we're hoping to build?
Yes, there is some worldwide ranking, for example, from IMD about the best smart cities in the world. And you have to know, now we are not talking anymore about smart cities, but it's better to talk about sustainable cities. But for sure, there is some ranking. And you have to know that each cities are quite different from the other one, linked to the kind of how the territories is I will say, modelized and so on. And you can go to Singapore, you can go to Paris or to Lausanne. There is some differentiation, but there is a common point. The common point is to have positive impact on our future for the biodiversity, environment, and for sure for citizenship. But for sure, there existing already some ranking worldwide in order to make the comparison on what is the involvement of the cities or how the cities are now in the transformation for a better future.
Maybe we got time for one more question. Earlier today in the morning segments, we were talking about the Global South and leveraging innovation technologies for the Global South. Are you working with any cities in the Global South? Any that you want to give a shout out to for any particular reason?
Not yet, but the idea, as you know, that in our ecosystem, we have the EPFL, and there is many initiatives in order to have this international and global impact. And the idea also from the association, as any association, is really to create the bridges and to have the compass and to have a better impact using already connections and to foster again collective intelligence all together and to use best practices from one partner to the other one and to integrate and to diffuse and to disseminate and to bring awareness to all the ecosystem.
Got it. Super. Well, Frederic, thank you so much. It was really fantastic to have you here and to share a little bit about Fustic. Congratulations on this association. I wish you the very best as we, like you said, move from smart city thinking to sustainable cities, which is necessary for our future. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.
All right. One of the most interesting things that I was personally aware of that started last year during the pandemic is this versus virus concept that came up. Versus virus. It was a hackathon series, I believe about 8 months, maybe even longer than that. A friend of mine was actually hosting it in Switzerland. But it was amazing to see yet again the power of collaboration, yet again the power of alliances. And our next panel, we're actually going to be digging into this. We've got a few people who were actively involved with Versus Virus to share about the experiences, why they got involved, what the value was. I'm curious for each of you as well, as the pandemic unfolded, how did you reinvent? How did you recreate? Honestly, for me, I was filled with hope looking at new friendships, new initiatives, new strengthening of communities by parties that, are successful on their own, but even more successful when they come together. Because it's not just a pandemic. With everything that's listed behind me over here, we have so many huge, seemingly insurmountable, but absolutely we can and we will overcome and achieve these goals, but together. And so now for this panel, I'd like to invite up Nikki, Carlos, another Daniel, Ale, and Biliana. So we've got our biggest panel, our biggest conversation. This is our biggest roundtable. Here we go. All 6 of us together. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for being a part of this. Nikki, I just mentioned a little bit, watching from far away in India, what I saw of Versus Virus. But can you talk us through what exactly is Versus Virus and do a better introduction than I did?
Yes, for sure. Thank you for hosting us. So Versus Virus was basically a very spontaneous initiative to fight together against COVID-19, against the pandemic. And our ambition was to create solutions for the challenges and problems we all perceived in all types of areas together as a Swiss population. So we managed to have thousands of participants, hundreds of solutions that were developed. And we also created an incubator afterwards to make sure that these solutions don't stop right there after being tested and prototyped, but that they continue and really can have an impact.
Excellent. Now, you said it was a little bit spontaneous, so my guess is there wasn't a perfect start with all the perfect partners coming together. So, Ale, at what point did EPFL get involved? Was it right at the beginning? Was it somewhere in the middle? Tell me a little bit about your own involvement.
Thank you, Dan. So everything was quite agile, as we like to say in the Versus Virus team. I mean, we say with EPFL Tech for Impact, we joined, I would say, quite at the start, but not on the first day. I think we joined on like day 3 or 4, which in Versus Virus terms, it's like a month of development because everything went super fast. From the moment that the idea started from one of the impact hubs, they got a bunch of different partners on board. Like every day there would be at least like 5-10 new people onboarded, and we would go into these big Google Meets with a lot of people in it. And then you just kind of had to figure out what you could contribute to from your point or what you could do. So it was entering indeed as an organization, so as EPFL Tech for Impact, but there were so many other organizations. I mean, all of us here, we have different jobs, we do different things. So everybody was there for the organization, but also on a personal matter. But I mean, that was what was so great about this team, that first, like the motivation to join was because everybody wanted to contribute to this, big quest to, kind of find solutions that could help us go through the crisis. But also everybody was ready to put their names and their organizations just there for everybody to use and for everybody to profit from. So like this multi-stakeholder innovation that you mentioned also at the beginning was definitely Versus Virus was a great example of that type of collaboration.
So what was the largest Google Meet you were a part of, Ale?
That's a good question. I don't know, at least like 100 person maybe?
100 people? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
but for organization, we're talking about, joining, like the first meets that I had, there were at least 40 people there and I just had no idea what I was supposed to do. And there are people being like, this task needs to be done. Like, can you do it? And it's just like, okay, hi, who are you? But sure. And this is kind of how, so to the people here, we started realizing at some point that we were seeing each other's faces a lot on these Google Meets. So this is kind of how we continue the work as well.
And I think there are some people that might be watching right now who were part of it, or at least recognize your faces, because Julia says, lovely to see you all. Andre says, congrats to the team, good job. So maybe some familiar faces in the audience who have also been part of these large Google Meets. So let's see how it worked with the Google Meet. Let's recreate that a little bit. How about everybody say, who are you? What organization do you represent? And some value that you provide, not to this panel, but just like in general. Let's attempt to recreate what would have been a very boisterous 100-person Google Meet, but now it's only 5 people. I've already done 2 of them. So for the other 3 of you, if you wouldn't mind, quickly introduce yourself, the organization you represent, and what value you bring to the Versus Virus team.
Shall I go first?
Go for it.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Biliana, and I'm an independent social innovation consultant. I coach, teach, and I support. The value I bring is I like listening to people and helping them find answers to their problems. And that's what I've done all the time.
Love it. Thank you.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Daniel Dobosch. I'm a particle physicist. I've been working at CERN and still doing some research there. And I'm also a co-founder of GluonNet, which is a company that looks into data analysis of some big data that you might see also in the background. And I think for Versus Virus, what was fascinating us and what we tried to basically bring in there is this kind of viral aspect. Ale mentioned that very, very nicely, that, in the first, I think the second day when we joined, we were something like 4 people in the meeting. And then 2 weeks later, we ended up having 5,000 people online working together worldwide for a better cause. I think that was something that we like and we like to bring into our projects.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me among the others. I'm Carlos Potamianos. I'm also a particle physicist. I still do research at CERN in Geneva. And I joined this hackathon through Daniel, but actually through the many hats we have. Besides GluonNet, which I also co-founded, a couple of years back, we co-founded the board, which organizes humanitarian hackathons. And so through that hat, what I wanted to bring to Versus Virus is this ability to bring in non-technological hackathons and really bring in everybody and a wide panel of people to tackle problems without necessarily having a technological component, though it's an important one. And I'm a bit tech savvy, so I like to work with the technology, but it's really to have the technology empower people to reach their goals. And what I also find very funny is that among us, I can still tell you today, there are people on this panel that I've still yet to meet physically. And just as a side funny story, Biliana, for example, I had never met before, and suddenly we bumped into each other into a paper shop in Geneva. And I just, from the voice, or she heard me, I heard her, I don't remember, but basically we recognized each other. So this was a very fun fact, but Ale and Nikki, I still have to meet physically. So this was also an exciting part of these Versus Virus hackathon. I hope we can meet soon, though.
One of the things that I'm a bit nervous about is I've seen a lot of like top parts of everybody's bodies on Zoom. And now when I go back to meeting people, I'll finally realize how tall or short they are or what kind of clothes they wear when they're in public. And I'm just not ready for that yet. So we have to see. I still have a few more weeks to go before I venture into the real world. Currently, we're in a COVID crisis country. And so there's very little traveling that's happening. So I'm just picking up on some of the introductions that you guys made. I'll start with you, Carlos, because you ended that one, so it's fresh in my mind. When I was doing a little bit of research about you yesterday, I know that you're involved with other hackathons as well. You're a fellow at Oxford. You're in different incubators, accelerators, hackathons. This is not unfamiliar territory. Can you share maybe one distinct difference between your experience at Versus Virus as opposed to other hackathons you might have been a part of before?
So that's a very interesting question. Definitely, there is not just one answer, but I'll keep it short. The key part, I think, for Versus Virus was the idea to combine a hackathon with an incubator. So really the idea that you devise project during one, or in our case, two hackathons, which were like weekend-long sprints for people to work on their projects, get lots of mentors to help them out, join a lot of people from different backgrounds. But then the key part is we selected about 50 teams who applied and wanted to continue the adventure, and really followed them up on a weekly basis for about 6 months. And this really boosted the outcome of the Versus Virus project, if I can say so. And this is a big difference from other hackathons, where it's sometimes great, you have great outcomes after a weekend, but bringing them to market, quote unquote, is actually sometimes another challenge of its own. And this is, I think, one of the big strengths of Versus Virus, to keep it short.
Absolutely. Liliana, when you were introducing yourself, you said that you were good at listening and coming up with solutions, and you work independently. And I also was digging a little bit about you, and I know that you've been working a lot with entrepreneurs, founders, startups. What do you think was one of the greater challenges experienced by startups and founders last year at the inception of Versus Virus? Obviously, things have changed now in 2021, but if you can go back, what do you think was one of the bigger challenges that was experienced?
Thank you very much for this question. I just want to clarify that I'm not good at finding answers. I'm good at helping them finding their own answers. And I think this is what matters in those interactions with people. Mm-hmm. So the biggest challenge that I perceived that the entrepreneurs had was to find structure and to find continuity and to find a community where they feel welcomed and where it's safe to fail and where they can really open up their hearts, share the bummers they've been through, and find new energy to keep on going. And I think this is what Versus Virus provided to a great extent on a weekly basis.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing, Liliana. I love that's always the mark of a good coach, is not someone who just tells you the answers, but helps you discover your own answers. So well done there. Daniel, a man named after my own name as well. Tell me a little bit, what are, in your opinion, the key factors to building a viable ecosystem for startups to really thrive?
I think the main, having experience in the last years, but especially looking into this Versus Virus kind of experience that we had there last year, I think a key factor that we especially learned last year was a viral ecosystem, a spirit where basically everybody is ready to collaborate. And this was really amazing to see that, within 2 weeks, you managed to bring in 160 different organizations together to work together for a good cause. And normally this kind of negotiations, bringing partners together, getting everybody in the spirit of this is possible and let's collaborate on this, takes months and years. And in this kind of spirit of, yes, let's do it. Let's organize a hackathon for thousands of people within 2 weeks, which in normal times you would get no, this is not possible. I don't even want to try that. Everybody was in the spirit of, yes, let's do it. Let's start it. And this is exactly what the startup needs. The readiness of partners to say, let's try out things. Let's see where they lead us to.
I love that. Just so the audience knows, Ricardo, Antoine, Julia, I see your questions coming in. I'm going to give another minute or so before we put this roundtable into the Q&A mode from the audience. So please pop your questions in. Final question to Nikki and Ale. I'm curious, what are some of your learnings from this experience, from Versus Virus? What are your takeaways?
Okay, I'll get started. I think my biggest learning, as you've heard so far as well, is that basically that this is possible. That a lot of strangers coming together from all over Switzerland with different backgrounds, building a project from scratch, only online. If you would have asked me if this works out, I would have said no, for sure not. As Daniel mentioned, you shouldn't try even. But it is actually possible, and I'm still amazed by that experience. And I thought a lot about why this was possible, and I think the key reasons were mentioned before. We were open for everyone, so we managed to get a lot of diverse people on board. The one thing that combined us was intrinsic motivation. We all wanted to have an impact, and the other really important element, I think, was that we had to reflect and discuss our ambition on a regular basis. So it was always, again, the question, so what exactly do we want to achieve? Because time is short and we won't be able to do everything. So we really had to be critical with ourselves and stay agile, reinvent ourselves on a very regular basis. And thereby, somehow, we managed to get this through even over 8 months. And I think we all had an amazing experience we wouldn't want to give away.
Ale, any thoughts to add to that? Any learnings?
I think Nikki's answer was quite great. Of course, as usual. I mean, just to add on that, really highlighting how important it was for us to be able to collaborate across the entire country. I mean, I think even right now we are quite well spread across Switzerland. I remember when it was just as I was starting also at the EPFL that I was told that maybe, you know, there's some divisions in Switzerland, but this team really kind of showed that was not entirely the case all the time, because we were able to collaborate, you know, Zurich, Normandy, and all the other areas, you know, Ticino as well. So that was quite interesting, and really just putting the focus on the motivation and why are we doing it. And because of that, we were able to then do everything that we do. Because if you put that as a priority, then the differences in, you know, organizations or in coordination, everything comes on a second stage, because we're doing it for a very clear purpose. And this is why, you know, Nikki mentioned that we were all the time being quite critical, all the time asking ourselves, are we doing this for the right reasons, or are we doing it just because we want to do something? And this kind of made us stay in this, you know, critical thinking, and then also reevaluate our activities, and therefore also being able to offer projects and people the right value. Because at the end, that's what matters, that we are able to offer, you know, the projects that were involved at Versus Virus, the right type of support, the personalized type of answers in what we could, and that was the best way to do it. So yeah, I would say that is the major learning. And I'm also looking forward to meeting everyone here in person soon. I also ran into Viliana once. So let's see if we can manage to get everyone else on board.
So we know that Biliana is out the most. That's the obvious conclusion here, the common ground. So we have a couple questions here. Ricardo is just wondering if any of you had heard about One Time for the Planet, if I got this right. Yep, One Time for the Planet. And if so, any thoughts on it? Open question. Do any of you know about this initiative? Yep. Okay. Might be something to look into. Maybe it's something along the lines, which is why Ricardo was triggered to kind of ask this question. Antoine had a question here, and his question is, can any of you share about one project that started from the hackathon and is still running? Are any of you aware of any pilot programs that are still happening right now?
I can take that if you want.
So, please do.
I think one of the projects that is really, really nice to see is a conference system that was started there, and now over the time now really is growing and growing. It's something like 50,000 participants in the online conferences that they organize. And this helps now also not only to meet in this kind of pandemic situations, but also to see that, you know, we can reduce the carbon footprint also in future. Maybe it's not necessary to travel for each kind of conference, and then basically allow people to better collaborate online. And the second one, which is connected, so I'm sneaking that in, is also, it was really nice to see that, for example, this kind of system then could be also used for the parliament, which was not prepared for this kind of pandemic situation to hold kind of, meetings online. And this project, and this in combination with another project, really then helped that they can meet online and take decisions online in the parliament.
All right, thank you for sharing. Julia Bowden has a question. She says, amazing to see how Versus Virus continues to evolve after the first session back in April 20. It seems like it was centuries ago. What's the next step? We probably have time just to answer this question. What's next for VV, Versus Virus? Anyone know? Anyone can share?
I can give an answer from the top of my heart, whatever the time calls for.
All right. Good answer. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you did, it was a heart response to a situation that was bigger than any individual, and it required a collective effort, and that's where this was born. So absolutely, to whatever the time calls for. Speaking about time, Andre says, can we do this again, please? And my guess is he was referring to this Versus Virus and the amazing stuff you guys were able to do. So yes, I wish you guys well. I'm delighted that we could have a session of 5 of you, because having 100 would have been exhausting, honestly, for Showcase 2030. But I'm delighted that you guys could be a part of this. Thank you for joining us here and for sharing a little bit about the Versus Virus experience. And I really hope that whenever the time calls, this little army bands up again to come up with a solution. So thank you for being a part of this. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Excellent. So there you go. Hopefully something that inspires to just show you what can happen on a very human level. I mean, often we're looking for institutions, governments, corporates, someone to take the lead. But look what happens when just individuals take the lead and say, you know what? We can do something together, and we should. And this is just one beautiful example of that. We have another video to bring to you, one of the Tech for Dev grantees for 2020. And we'd love to share that with you right now before I introduce our next speaker. Roll the tape.
So humanitarian workers, we want to save lives and respond to human suffering wherever found. But at the same time, we don't want to damage the environment, the planet. But if you look at the current reality in the shelter sector, it is such that we distribute plastic sheets of 4 by 6 meters, which we call tarpaulins. There are hundreds of thousands every year distributed to people who lost their homes, either because of conflict or because of natural disasters. We know that this is creating a plastic pollution.
The technology that we are developing at the LPDC is based on biomass valorization. We developed a new bioplastic. As you can see, this plastic is transparent, is flexible, and it is also biodegradable. And this is why we think that this plastic might be the solution for these problems.
So for this project, our colleagues in Meibom, Bangladesh, they conducted market research of what is the feedstock available in Bangladesh that could be used for the process of fabrication of these tarpaulins.
We finally decided which feedstock will be the best to extract the hemicellulose and realize this bioplastic. And we finally choose the bagasse and also the coconut fibers. The second milestone was about the scale-up of the production. Now we arrived at the kilogram scales. About the property of this polymer to make these tarpaulins, what we did first was to try the flexibility and the mechanical property of one of our polymers. And this results was promising.
So that the impact that we are hoping to have with this project is really to be less damaging to the environment. We hoped to protect the local resources, the local water, the local land, with the distribution of emergency shelter tarpaulins. But we also hope to have a social impact, because at the end of the day, these tarpaulins will be produced in the countries where we hope them to be used. Therefore, we hope to create local employment, for example, for collecting the local bio-waste, which will then be used for the production.
The beauty about this project is it's not only for Bangladesh, but it's broadly for all the tarpaulins around the globe that are needed. And if we look further into the future, everything we are learning today by developing these plastics can be applied to other plastic applications in packaging or other functions that are very needed in these global south countries. And we hope to see this plastic basically help on many levels around the globe.
Absolutely.
And there you go. Those were some of the grantees' conversations from Tech for Dev. I have to be honest, I know you're not supposed to have favorites for something like a Showcase 2030, but I've been really intrigued by this next talk. It's science for diplomacy and diplomacy for science. Let me back up a little bit. This next gentleman used to be a member of the Danish national under-18 football team. He's still very athletic. He swims, bikes, he does yoga every single day. He is a professor at EPFL in the Institute of Environmental Science and Engineering. And there's a specific discovery of corals in the northern Red Sea that has led to an initiative that he's going to talk about, the EPFL-based Transnational Red Sea Center. So from a man of incredible athletic ability, on a side note, I also found out on the sneaky side, on a personal level, that he's fantastic at homemade bread. So all of that put together with science and diplomacy, we now have this talk about corals and the future of the ocean. With that, Professor of EPFL, Anders, over to you.
Thank you very much. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I share my screen, and here's a slide. Let me know if there's any problems with it, but I think you should see it. So thank you very much. Yeah, the Transnational Red Sea Center. What is this all about? Well, it's about corals. It's about coral reef ecosystems. It's about the incredible biodiversity that they represent in our oceans, and it's about the catastrophic loss of them that is happening in our oceans today. But it's also about a hope of preserving at least one major coral reef ecosystem alive for future generations beyond the end of this century, and that hope is in the Red Sea. We now know. This is how a coral reef ecosystem or coral reef should look like. Healthy corals, beautiful corals, full of fish. It's a highly vibrant, highly biodiverse ecosystem. But unfortunately, this is how many reefs around the world look like today. The corals are dead, and because the corals are at the base of the ecosystem, when they die, the whole thing comes tumbling down. There are no fish here. And it's not just a question of loss of biodiversity. It's also very much a question of loss of ecosystem services from these reefs, in terms of fishing, income from tourism, shore protection, etc. Literally hundreds of millions of people are directly depending on these ecosystem services on the shores of the nations that are hosting these reefs. And the situation is very, very serious. In the last 30 years alone, we have lost 50% of what we call the pre-industrial coral reef cover. And even at the middle of this century, at the rate we are losing the corals at the moment, we expect that only 10% of the reefs will still be alive in 2050, 2060, which is literally tomorrow. So why are they dying? Well, they're dying because of a number of local environmental stress factors: pollution, overfishing, fish farming, and just physical destruction. There's too many people running all over these reefs and destroying them. But on a global scale, there's one factor that's even more efficient in killing corals, unfortunately, and that's global warming, because the rising water temperatures and more frequent heat waves stress the corals into a stress reaction, which we call coral bleaching. And in a state of coral bleaching, the corals will die on a timescale of a few weeks. And that's what's happening on a massive scale around the world today. But there is one hope. This is the Red Sea. And a few years ago, our research group, along with a number of international collaborators from Israel, from Jordan, from Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, discovered that in particular in the northern Red Sea, we have a coral population which is extremely resistant to global warming and which actually can survive even the worst global warming scenarios and trajectories that are predicted for the end of this century and beyond, which means that the corals in the northern Red Sea region are humanity's absolute best chance of preserving a major coral reef ecosystem alive and functioning today, which of course rests on the assumption that these corals are not destroyed by local environmental stress factors in the Red Sea system itself, which is a very small system, and that is a regional challenge for the countries around the Red Sea, and that is why we have created this Transnational Red Sea Center. So let me just summarize. We have in the Red Sea a unique reef ecosystem with a real chance to survive. We also have, and that's no secret when you look at the map, a geopolitically highly complicated region. We can only achieve our goal of protecting these corals in the long run if we have the best possible science underpinning the environmental protection strategies, and if these strategies are implemented and enforced on a regional scale. And this calls for a marriage between science and diplomacy, and this is why we have created the Transnational Red Sea Center, and it's why this center is located here at EPFL in Lausanne, in Switzerland. This center was all inaugurated in 2019 by the Swiss Foreign Minister, Mr. Ignacio Cassis, and our EPFL President, Martin Wetzeli. And the basic idea is that we want to merge Switzerland's long tradition for effective diplomacy with cutting-edge science on a regional scale in the Red Sea region. And this will allow the science to reach the highest governmental levels and create dialogue, which is the only way we can achieve meaningful regional environmental protection of these unique reef ecosystems. So what do we want to achieve with this center, and what will it deliver? Well, we will organize cutting-edge scientific studies of the coral reef at the scale of the entire Red Sea, and install and maintain strategically placed coral health monitoring stations. And this will establish what we call the Red Sea ecosystem baseline, which is really needed in order to put all future changes to this ecosystem into the proper perspective. All the data that we produce will be transparently shared according to the principles of open science, of course, and none of this has ever been done before, certainly not in this region. We will train the next generation of scientists from the region in our partner laboratories, and this educational component is really fundamental to the long-term protection efforts. And we will connect and convey our science products to the highest level of policy and lawmakers in the region. And we will organize transnational dialogue and lay the ground for regional decision-making and implementation. And so with this science for diplomacy and diplomacy for science approach, we will reach across the cultural, the religious, and the political barriers, if you want, of the region, all of it with one fundamental goal in mind, the long-term preservation of the unique Red Sea coral reef ecosystems. And so the logistical platform for our scientific work will be this beautiful sailing ship, the Fleur de Passion, which is owned by the Geneva-based not-for-profit organization, the Fondation Pacifique, as you can see here. And with this, I simply want to thank you for your attention and hope that you will support the Transnational Red Sea Center as we fight really to keep alive what is de facto humanity's best hope of preserving at least one major coral reef ecosystem for future generations. Thank you very much.
Wow, Anders, I feel really inspired about this. I really was looking forward to this most of today. So thank you for bringing us into that. Let me see if I can get us both on the screen, and would be lovely because we have a couple questions that are coming in from people. There it is. Excellent. Anders, congratulations. We have a couple messages in our Q&A just saying amazing effort, amazing initiative, amazing work. And as someone who was quite recently in the Maldives, where we have some amazing, pristine reefs, and also where I've traveled to tourist areas, and you can just see on a small level how humans have devastated reefs. And I cannot imagine on a global level what we're doing. So, okay, lots of questions, little time. So enough blah, blah. I just wanted you to catch your breath after your amazing talk. Now let's jump into the questions. So here we go, Anders. First one, have you heard about 3D printed reefs? And what is your opinion on it? That came in from an anonymous person.
I think this whole concept of restoring coral reefs, because this is what this is about. 3D printed reefs that are used to as basically as a base for letting corals regrow damaged areas. You know, it's a two-edged sword because you know, on one hand we all feel this strong urge to reconstruct the coral reef that has been devastated and destroyed. On the other hand, if you don't take away the environmental stress that is actually killing the corals, you can reconstruct the corals as much as you want because a few years later they will die again. And so, you know, we really can, there is no magic bullet and there is no way around it. If we want to preserve coral reefs on this planet today, we need to remove the major stress factor on them, and that major stress factor is global warming.
Got it. Beatrice says, this is fascinating, Anders. All the best with the center's work. How do you ensure your actions will achieve scale in order to tackle such a pressing issue?
So this is a very good question, and this is actually built into the project from the beginning. You know, the Red Sea system, I don't know if I said it, but the Red Sea system is very small for us, you know, as ocean and bodies of water go. So any pollution that will, will spread around in that system will hit the whole system immediately. This is why it is so important to understand that it is a regional challenge for all the countries around the world. I mean, around the Red Sea. But of course, when you look at the map, as I said, you're looking at Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, Egypt, Sudan, and Eritrea. This is not exactly the easiest geopolitical region on the planet. We can all agree on that. Even them can agree on that. So this is why we immediately created this partnership with the foreign ministry here in Switzerland, who see this as a very good opportunity for them to create science diplomacy, if you want. Use science as a neutral vehicle to go into a region like that and create dialogue about something else than who shot first and where should the embassy be put, and all the old issues. And so this is really our attempt. Science for diplomacy, diplomacy for science, with a very strong backing and involvement of the foreign ministry, which comes from the top. It comes from our foreign minister itself, Mr. Ignacio Cassis, which we really appreciate. This is really our attempt to do exactly that, achieve scale, because we need the governments in that region to discuss this and create, environmental protection, regional environmental protection strategies, and enact them together. If not, we're wasting our time.
Got it. Anders, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for sharing about your initiative. I hope you have inspired others to research and look into what you're doing, see how they can support. But thank you for being a part of Showcase 2030.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, so that was really inspiring. We have more. There's another story about revolutionizing cement. Yep, that's coming up in a moment. But for now, let's bring up a roundtable. I feel like it's time to have another conversation, this time about enterprise for society. I've got two special guests who are going to be joining me here on the screen in a second, Arnaud and Jean-Philippe. So while we get them on the screen, let me tell you a little bit about them. Arnaud is the professor of strategy at IMD. He has consulted for numerous organizations, including Shell, SAP, Lenovo, Cisco, Tetra Pak, and Professor Jean-Philippe is a full professor of strategic management. He's a dean at HEC Lausanne and a member of the executive committee for Enterprise for Society. Gentlemen, lovely to see you.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. All right. So let's kick things off. Jean-Philippe, I'm going to start with you. Why Enterprise for Society? Why now? What is it? How's it different? Just lay out a little bit for our audience the unique proposition of Enterprise for Society.
All right, sure. Yes, I'm very, very happy to speak about that because it's something that is very close to my heart at the moment and something we've been working on for a while. So in a nutshell, Enterprise for Society is a new institute that has been created 1 year ago jointly by three institutions, EPFL, the University of Lausanne, and IMD. And this institute has been created based on a joint and a common belief by the three of our institutions that the economy was going to go into something different, right? And that we were at a tipping point, and that we were going into something in which the way economic life is organized would have to be completely reimagined and recreated. And this belief was related on actually what I would call three disrupting factors. The first is very, very close to what Anders talked about. It's actually the climate challenge, right? We know that the economy has to change because now there is enough scientific evidence to show that and to suggest that we really need to change the way we produce, exchange, and trade over things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is basically a social challenge, if you will, right? Or all the discussion regarding inequality and how, you know, the wealth is actually distributed, and all the social unrest and protest. We see that as a sign that, you know, socially all these things have to change as well, right? And that there is a need for a new economic model that would be more acceptable. And the third thing, so those are the two constraints, and there are opportunities, right? And the third type of disruptive factor is actually connected to technology, right? So we believe that since, you know, basically for the most of the 20th century, we've been building on some pillars of the second industrial revolution, and that the technological pillars of these are actually being questioned. That means the basic technologies we produce and distribute with, which means, you know, artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on. The energy we're using, I mean, we're clearly using, and that's part of the opportunity towards more greener energy. And the third aspect is actually all the stuff related to communication and transportation and logistics, right? And so, you know, with connected vehicles and so on, we're probably moving into something that will be different. And so these three pillars being at the core of what made the second industrial revolution, we believe will be at the core of something completely different in the way economic life will be organized. So Enterprise for Society was basically designed and created as a way to first think about, you know, what all of this means, right? Where are we going? What are going to be the boundaries of this new economy? And how can we make it work better? That's the first thing. The second thing was related to training people and training future students in particular, to actually make sure that we have the future leaders that will lead, right? This change and this fundamental economic change. And that these leaders have to come both from, let's say, the hard science, let's say EPFL type of profile, but also the more managerial / economic type of profile, you know, such as the ones, you know, that is typically taught at IMD or the University of Lausanne, HEC Lausanne, which where I am from. Sure. And the third pillar of this initiative is actually a connection with startups and trying to activate innovation by startup and by corporations. We want this thing to be inclusive. We want this thing to be a coalition of players, right? So not only our three institutions, but also a host of other players supporting us and interacting with us to try to change basically the way the economy is going.
So, Arnaud, I want to pick up on at least two of those things that were mentioned. One is about training students. I'm aware that there is a new master's, is SMT, Master's in Sustainable Management Technology. Is that correct? So That's a program that's across the three institutes. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Why was that initiated? What kind of students are gravitating to that? But I also would love for you to comment on Jean-Philippe's part about involving startups. And so if you can comment on both of those, that'd be great.
Sure. So, new master's degree in sustainable management and technology. As Jean-Philippe was mentioning, the idea is to say the leaders of tomorrow will have it more complex than the leaders of today or the leaders of yesterday, and they now have to integrate and be able to do more things than our generation or previous generation was able to do. So we better train them to do that. Now, to your question, Dan, when you're asking me why three partner institutions, what's the value of bringing together EPFL, UNIL, and IMD? Well, if you look back, Neil Armstrong was the first guy on the moon, but he needed Buzz and Michael. And, you know, Jimi Hendrix, as good as he was, he still needed Noel and Mitch. Or maybe in different terms, any self-respecting Frenchman will tell you that a meal needs to have a starter, a main, and a dessert. And anything less than this is utter heresy, or what Americans would call food. So the point I'm trying to make here is that no matter how good you are, sometimes a little help from two friends can go a long way. So you have excellent institutions. You have EPFL, world-class in technology. You have UNIL, world-class in econ, and you have IMD, world-class in management. What happens if we put all these together? And the answer is we can deliver as a whole, as a unit, something that none of us can contribute independently. Now, to your second point, we can involve the community, the entrepreneurs in various ways, and they will be involved in various ways, from intervention in classes, supervision of internships, and down the line, hiring the graduates. The idea here is we've thought of SMT, the master's degree, as a partnership with a broad set of stakeholders, and entrepreneurs are certainly front and center in there.
I love how deadpan your face was as you brought in so smoothly Jimi Hendrix and French food, and you didn't even crack a smile on that. You were so smooth with that. That was so well done.
This is food. We can't laugh about that.
So there's a couple of people asking the same question I was going to ask next. So Jean-Philippe, maybe you can comment on this. Examples, please. Would love to hear about some of the projects, some of the concrete examples of what this partnership has created so far.
Right. So as I said, there are three pillars, the research, the program that Arnaud just talked about, and then the part that is about, stimulating innovation, right? And if I take the three of them, or at least, the first and the third, since Arnaud has already commented on the second, on the first one, I mean, it's a lot of it is going to be about applied research projects, right? I mean, as I said, it's going to be about trying to understand what are the boundaries of this new economic life, the way it's going to be organized. So for instance, the way we have done it is that we have defined some research platforms on which we have scholars from the three institutions that work, but also that basically are working and will work more with industry, with corporations, with firms, on different topics. So to give you an example, one of them is on the future of work, right? So we have people from labor economics, people from the management of human resources, leadership, but also we have people working on machine learning, robotics, and so on to try to understand, okay, what is it going to be possible tomorrow regarding the way work is organized and delivered? And how should we do it? Where are the sources of wealth that can be created? But also, what are the potential constraints that are connected to that? So we have a project on that. We have a very large project on mobility and the future of transportation. We have a host of platforms like this that we have defined, right, and which basically cover all parts of economic life, including globalization, the organization of the international monetary system, the future of food, and so on and so forth. And on all of this, of course, as I said, the idea is not only that we remain among scholars, but rather that we reach out to companies that they help us also finance, right, some of these things. But it's not about money. It's about ideas. It's about bringing innovation. So that's on the research part. On the startup part more, I would say that, we want to do two things. First, we want to identify and include in our ecosystem the best startup that work at the forefront and really at the frontier of what is being done, right, on this new way of organizing economic life, on the future of work, for instance, on the future of energy, on the future of transportation, for instance. And so what we're going to do and what we're going to propose is actually a process in which we're going to try to help these companies, right, support them, support these startups in particular, to try to develop their products. We're going to try to introduce them and connect them with some of the corporations from our network, and try to create altogether some sort of a dynamite, if you will, type of ecosystem, right, from which basically innovation is going to come from. As I said before, I mean, for us, it's not only about thinking about the future, it's also about actually really engaging into it, right? And so we really want to have this interaction between applied research, but also try to include, understand, and help, right, the innovation that comes from startup and corporations. And as Arnaud was saying, of course, include our students into this, right? So that these guys are prepared and that these guys are also part of the move.
Arnaud, probably the last question that we might have time for, but I'm eager to know, and I'm sure a lot of people are as well, what does success look like for this initiative? Next 5 years, 10 years? How do you know that this has been a good collaboration?
Well, various factors. so I'll talk perhaps more on the master's side, but it applies to all. I think we're going to see excellence and a new way of excellence, something that we haven't conceptualized just yet, where graduates or actors within E4S are not just excellent in one silo, the way we academics think of, technology or economics or management. But so we're going to see a broader, more transversal excellence. We're also going to see some impact with actors in society talking with one another. So it's universities getting, and I know it's a groundbreaking concept, but bear with me here. We're going to get out of our campus and actually interact with people from local governments and from organizations, for-profit and non-profit, and work with them together on solving that one common problem. And I think the ultimate success indicator, if you like, is I would expect a change in the way we think about this. In 5 years, I suspect people will come back and say, okay, this is the new way of the world. Why didn't we think of this before? This is obviously a strong and effective way of tackling complex problems. Let's carry on with this.
So I'm not sure who asked this question. I'm not sure if they categorize themselves in the leader of tomorrow or leader of today. But the question that came in most recently is E4S targeting only leaders of tomorrow or also leaders of today?
So
both. Both. So let's say we have a concerted effort, at least on the management side of things, with the master's degree. We have a concerted effort of training this generation of leaders. By the way, that first cohort will start in September. We've had a wonderful set of applicants to it. We are going really to attract the best and brightest. But independent of this sort of longer term, perhaps, initiative, we are also independently, 3 institutions, but also as a whole with E4S, connecting with the leaders of today and saying, okay, we are now facing a problem that's more complex than any before, and here are tools to help you do that. Jean-Philippe?
Yeah, just one single word on that. I mentioned before, the climate challenge. This thing very clearly sets a time boundaries, right? We need to act now. So it's very, very clear that E4S wants to play a big role right away. And so that we, of course, want to reach out, as Arnaud was saying, we want to reach out to leaders of startups, of corporations, of public policymakers right away and have an impact on them. Right? We don't have a specific training program for these guys, but but we want them to participate, and we want to include them into this initiative for sure.
So, given that so much of today's showcase is about collaboration and partnerships, maybe this is one good closing comment. Just generally, when it comes to collaboration, yes, on one hand, you are committed to education. Yes, on one hand, all of you are committed to solving problems of the future. But let's be real. You're also competing institutes. There's also a finite number of students. And if you attract one to one institute, then they're not part of another. This is still a business model that needs to be sustainable. How do you build collaboration when there's also competition? Is it one or the other? Is it possible to have both? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So it's funny. I'll start, Jean-Philippe, but I'll leave you more time on this because being what are you calling it now? A retiring dean? You've probably had to think about this more than me, but I really don't conceptualize these 3 institutions in particular as competitors. We are really here. It's really a matter of joining up with your 2 best friends and see how do we develop the Lausanne area and the Geneva, the Le Mans Lake Geneva, or possibly Switzerland, into a port of excellence that really fires on all cylinders, the way we haven't necessarily done before because we are doing just isolated efforts. So really, to me, it's one of those few instances of clearly black and white, 100% collaboration is a feature, not a bug.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, if I can add something on that, I mean, it's, of course, Dan, it's a good question to ask, right? And I understand that you want to create some tension a little bit, but it's actually really not the case. I mean, as Arnaud was saying, we're very complementary in terms of skills. We're very complementary also in terms of actually the types of students we attract. I mean, EPFL has been living alongside UNIL, for a long time. We attract students in different areas, of course, right, with different focus. And same thing for IMD. I mean, IMD is much more focused on high-level cooperation and executive education, where the core of HSA is actually much more on younger students, right? So, in fact, as Arnaud was saying, the core of this, there's very little competition on students, and we are completely 100% focused more on actually leveraging the collaboration so that we enhance the experience of all of these people across our three institutions, right? And within, of course, the InfoRS Institute.
While I most certainly was not trying to create tension, I'm delighted that there is not tension and that this is all best friends hanging out. In which case, when I'm back in Lausanne, I cannot wait to join the best friend gang over a little beer or something of that sort on the river. But thank you so much for being a part of Showcase 2030. Thank you for sharing how, yes, education is beyond borders, beyond campuses, and is done better in collaboration. I think it's beautiful. I think it's wonderful. And I wish you the absolute best. So thank you for representing this today at Showcase 2030.
Thanks for having us.
See you later.
Thanks a lot, Dan. That was great.
Absolutely. So with that, let's go to something rather special. Now, Ale had the amazing privilege of walking around campus and interacting directly with some of the innovators. Now, we've been bringing some of them live into the studio, but for some, we wanted to show you what's actually happening in the labs. And so Ale went and met with Professor Karen, who's all about disrupting the cement industry. I think initially I said concrete by accident, the cement industry. So Ale now is going to take all of us, be included, this Showcase 2030 out onto the campus and into the lab of Karen. Ale, over to you.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Meet the Entrepreneur series at EPFL. So right now we are at the LMC, which is the Laboratory for Construction Materials at EPFL, where we're going to meet Professor Karen Scrivener, who's going to tell us more about innovation in the cement industry. Let's go and meet her. Hello, Professor. So nice to see you.
Welcome, Ali, and welcome to the Construction Materials Laboratory at EPFL.
I'm super excited because I've been told I'm going to learn about an innovative new material. Is this what we're looking at?
Unfortunately not. We made this 20 years ago when I first came to EPFL, before we came up with this idea. But it's quite interesting because this volume here represents the amount of concrete that is made for every person in the world every year. Quite a lot.
That's quite a lot, I cannot imagine. Great, so I'm excited to learn more. Can you show me?
Yes, please come ahead.
So thank you, Professor Karen Scrivener, for having us here today at your lab. Could you tell us more first, why is cement important?
Well, we hear more and more about cement these days because it accounts for something like 8% of world CO2 emissions. But we have to understand that the reason for this high level of emissions is just because we use more of it than all other materials put together. And on a per unit basis, it actually has one of the lowest emissions of CO2 that there is. And the other problem is that it's what's called a hard to decarbonize material. And this means that, it's less than half of the CO2 emissions associated with energy. The other half come from a chemical reaction. So we use limestone to produce cement. And during the production process, that limestone, which is calcium carbonate, breaks down into calcium oxide and CO2, which is emitted into the environment.
So we use it a lot, basically, and it's hard to decarbonize. This is a major issue.
Yeah.
And what exactly are you doing with LC3? Why it's so innovative, and what is the potential that we can have from that?
So even though cement and concrete have these very low emissions, that doesn't mean we can't continue to improve this. And this is the, the central thing we're working on here in our laboratory. So a few years ago, we came up with this new formulation we call LC3, which stands for limestone calcined clay cement. So in this LC3, we replace half of the classic cement by a combination of calcined clay and limestone. But this time the limestone isn't heated up, so it doesn't decompose. And the clay, so I mean, clays are super abundant everywhere in the world. And when you what's called calcine them, you heat them up to about 800 degrees, which is a much lower temperature than you use to make cement. So overall, they still have some emissions, but it's about 1/4 of those from the classic cement. And that means that when we have the whole formulation, the LC3 formulation, the CO2 can be up to 40% lower than in existing materials.
And what does this 40% lower mean, let's say, on a global scale for the production?
Well, that's really important because on a global scale, if we can really get this adopted worldwide, we calculate we can reduce between 400 and 800 million tons of CO2 a year. That's like 1 to 2% of our entire global emissions. Or put another way, it's 10 to 20 times the emissions of all of Switzerland.
That's quite significant.
Yeah.
I don't think we hear enough about that 2% reduction from this change.
Yeah. And what's also important is that we can, we have the raw materials we need to do it nearly everywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. It can be made using existing technology, and even it can save money. It can be produced more cheaply. So you don't have to think about a green premium. The thing that we really hope can drive producers to take this up is the fact that it can be lower cost.
And because you're saying about producers, where exactly are you producing the cement currently?
Well, we want to work in the countries where the demand for cement is going up. So more than 90% of cement use is in emerging and developing economies. Mm-hmm. And particularly we've been working in India. India is the second largest consumer of cement today. But if you compare it to the largest, which is China, the consumption per capita is still about 5 to 6 times lower than in China. So if you see what's happened in China in the past few decades, what's probably going to happen in India in the next decades, it's a very important country. But we're also working in many countries in Africa, in many countries in Latin America, because these are all the countries where the demand is going to be strongest in the coming decades.
Yeah. And could you tell us, because here we have some samples, could you tell us a bit what are we seeing?
Yes, so here we have the LC3 sample, and then this is the classical cement, and we can make these concretes, we can test their properties like their strength. We can tell this is LC3 in the lab because it has this little bit reddish color. Mm-hmm. And that was actually a problem we had to solve because commercially people say we don't want red cement. Cement has to be black, but when you make the calcined clay commercially, this is quite easy to solve. There's a very widely available technology coming from the brick industry where you can make it black or gray or black rather than red.
And then you won't be able to tell the difference, right? Because it's the same weight.
Yeah. And that's what people want. They want something they can use in the same way. And all the CO2 savings are inside, but
the consumer doesn't.
The consumer shouldn't know because otherwise you have a big resistance to using this.
So this is great that you already mentioned this. What are other general challenges that you see in the implementation of this type of cement?
Well, I think there's 2 challenges. One is to really get the information out. So, for the last few years, we've been working mainly with the big cement companies. I think now these big cement companies like Lafarge Holcim, like Heidelberg Cement, these are largely convinced and they're adopting this in their portfolio of cement. They're making more and more trials around the world. But we have to realize these big producers are maybe only 30% of the market. And so we have to reach the other 70% of small and medium-sized producers worldwide to realize the potential. And the other obstacle, of course, is, not only proving that it has a good strength or whatever right now, but is it going to still be there and doing well in 50 or 100 years? Yeah. And of course, we haven't got 50 or 100 years to wait to try to do it by trial and error. So there we have to use our scientific approaches and our knowledge of the chemistry and the microstructure to, to see how it works. And of course the fact that it has got a lot of similarities with existing materials is very important because that gives us confidence.
And that is the work that you're doing here at the lab at EPFL?
Yeah, so this is our work at EPFL. We have these big labs where we test the overall properties. Upstairs we have labs with electron microscope and X-ray diffraction where we actually look at the interior structure.
Mm-hmm. So I'm super convinced that indeed this is a priority we need to also focus on. What are other ways that people, organizations can support you? What the type of support you're looking for right now?
Yeah, that's very good you brought up this point because for the last 7 years we've been supported by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And I think we've been able to do an awful lot with what they've given to us. But unfortunately, that's coming to an end next year. And of course, we don't think everything's going to be done by then. So we do need continued support. We have a great leverage because really all we're doing is the research and the information exchange. Once the companies are convinced, then they make their own investments. Mm-hmm. So the big money, of course, maybe for each cement plant, you need to put in a few millions. But for our activity, for between 1 and 2 million a year, we can do all this work with all our team in India and elsewhere in the world.
So this is also something that international type of cooperation agencies could be interested in.
Yeah, we're really looking now to see if we can get access to things like green funds, philanthropic donations, all this spectrum of activities to support, green tech.
So thank you so much for the super insightful interview. We at Tech for Impact have been following the journey of LC3 for many years, and we're very excited to see what's coming next.
Well, thank you for coming, and we hope to have you back in a short while.
Well, we're very fortunate that Karen is here in the studio with us. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. And how are you?
Fantastic. It's lovely to have you. Thank you. I'm so sad because we had talked about you and I doing this interview and chatting in real life, but due to COVID, we've unfortunately had to do this remotely. But I'm glad we can do this Q&A together. We actually have tons of questions, so I hope you're ready to go full professor mode and answer all the questions that are coming in. You ready to go?
Sure, I'll do what I can.
Okay. So question number 1 is why use cement in particular and not other quote unquote sustainable materials for construction? They were suggesting bamboo, reclaimed wood. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's purely a matter of availability of these materials. Just to give you an example, even if you wanted to replace just 1/4 of materials made from cement with wood, you would have to plant new sustainable forests 1.5 times the size of India. And I think it's easy to realize we just don't have that land area available. So all these materials can be important in the right context, but the amounts we have available are absolutely tiny. And if we're going to respond to the demand of the growing world population and urbanization, concrete is really the only solution.
Okay. There's a question that comes in here. What's your strategy to accelerate the adoption of LC3?
Well, I think it's very much a question of communication, and we hope that it will be kind of, an exponential growth. It was quite difficult to get the first people to adopt it because, everybody's afraid of doing something new and being the first out there. Now we already have production going on in a couple of factories, one in Ivory Coast, one in Colombia. And now this year, there was quite a few trials taking place in Europe. So once people see that it works, then I think we'll be getting more people. But we also need to really help the companies, because if you have a typical state-of-the-art cement plant, which is producing 10,000 tons a day, you can't just stop this for a few hours and try out this new material. So that's where our project team comes in. You know, we go to the plants, we find the clays, we do the small scale trials. And when everything's been proven at a small scale, then the company hopefully will make the decision to invest. We also help them with looking at the financial feasibility, which is important. So this is a very big component of what our project team are doing on a day-to-day basis.
And there's a question about the activities in India. Someone's asking if you can elaborate a little bit about what it is that you are doing in India at this moment.
Well, I mean, you know, you've got to work with people in these countries. You know, I can't zoom in from Switzerland and convince people in India. So we've got a whole team out there. And I mean, one very important thing, for example, has been working with the standards committees there so that we can get this new cement type taken up in the standards. Then it's, you know, going to visit the individual companies, testing their clays, as I described, making demonstration buildings so people can see this. So, you know, this is very, very important, the team in India.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this. Really hope that Showcase 2030 and, of course, the video that we just played will help a lot with the communication, with the message. By the way, if you're looking for an inspiring TED Talk, Karen's done a few of them, and they're really great. And I've really enjoyed watching her tell the story. So please do take a look at those as well. And do share the word about LC3 and this amazing innovation that's coming out of the park. All right. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. To our wonderful audience here at Showcase 2030, let's take a quick breather in the form of trivia. Because I know it's been content for a little while. There's a lot that you've been kind of listening to. But I just thought, why not put this to the test? How well have you been listening? And so it's really simple. You're going to see the other way around. You're going to see over here a question popping up. Let's do the first one. Let's put up the first question over here. And all you have to do is put in the chat section A, B, C, or D. So this question is, in what year was EPFL founded? And so you can put in here very easily, A, B, C, or D. Who knows how old EPFL is? That is the question. Now, I will tell you that EPFL is considered one of the younger institutes. So we have a guess for B, 1942. We have a guess for 1969. It's one of the youngest institutes of technology. A guess for C, okay. So a lot of guesses for 1969. The answer is, and you probably have Googled this, is that how you know? Or is this just information you like to know? 1969. That's right. It is C, 1969. Let's show the next question, please. And how many nationalities are at EPFL? Do you think it's 80, 100, 120, 140 nationalities? So Antoine guesses 100 nationalities are represented. I was looking this up. EPFL is actually the top 3 most international campus, according to QS ranking. There are 16,000 students and collaborators. So with that clue in place, the answer is not D. Some of you are guessing 140. That's right. C, 120. Let's do another one, shall we? Let's see what the question is. Ooh, this is a good one. It's all about entrepreneurship at EPFL. How much was raised by startups at EPFL from 2012 to 2020? Get out your calculators and take a guess. Was it 450 million? Is it 550 million? Is it 650 million? Or is it 1.5? Is that 1.5 or 1.6? 1.6 billion Swiss francs. What do we think it is? How much do you think was raised by startups contributing through the spin-offs of the EPFL ecosystem. What do you think it is? Take some guesses. Would love for you to share your knowledge on the startup space. How much do you think was raised by a startup? Off the charts. All right. So what do we think it is? 450 million, 550 million. So someone guessed D, 1.6 billion Swiss francs. Could it really be that large? Could it really be that large? Okay, Carol's saying C, 650. Beatrice is saying B, 550 million. Well, believe it or not, it actually is D. 1.6 billion Swiss francs have been raised. This is amazing. Well done to all of the startups. This is one for the researchers because, well, and then we'll go into SDGs, all right? So let's do one more question here on EPFL. How many scholarly publications at EPFL last year in 2020? Midst of a pandemic, how many of these publications do you think? Scholarly publications were released. 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, or 1,000? So we have a guess for 4,000. We have a guess for 1,000. Do we have any guesses in the middle for 3,000 or 2,000? What if I gave you this little clue? I was reading about this. It's an average of one publication per professor per month. Wow, that is incredible. So at EPFL, it's an average of one publication per professor per month, which leaves us at the right answer of A, 4,000. That's right, 4,000 scholarly publications last year, which is incredible. Let's switch gears. I want to talk about the SDGs here. So we've got some questions coming in, and I gave you the clue to this question right at the start. So whoever was here, can we put the next question, please? And the question is, there it is. What is UN SDG number 13? In my opening monologue, my opener, I actually was talking about all the beautiful boxes. Ooh, I wonder if it's one of the boxes that is here on the screen on that side over there. Is it there? I see number 12. Oh, I do see number 13. Oh, we should have hidden the answer. So I guess the answer is on the screen. If you're looking at it right at the bottom of the green box. Oopsie, my bad in the design here. But it is, yep, Neeraj, you got it correct. It is B. It is B, Carol. Well done. Julia says B, right behind you. That's right. I know. I noticed it only now that it's actually on the screen. Climate change. Yes. And so that is SDG number 13. This one's a little bit harder. It's the last one. Let's do one more. One more question. It's the most challenging question so far. Oh, I wonder if you can read all of this on the screen. Let me see if I can read it out for you. It's the final question. Which is not true of the SDGs? So it's tricky. 3 of them are true. 1 is false. So read through it. The first one is the new goals are the result of a 3-year process involving UN member states, 83 national surveys engaging over 7 million people. Could that be true? 7 million people did the survey. Second possibility is it was proposed by Colombia and Guatemala, originating at the Rio 20 summit in 2012. We've been hearing a lot about it being 2015, but could it have started actually in 2012? C, in 2015, all 193 United Nations member states committed to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Could that be true? All 193? Or did some of them say no? Could it be C? Or could it be D? The United Nations finally adopted a list of 17 goals, 150 targets, and 300 indicators. Which one could it be? A, B, C, or D? Make a guess right now. It's a final question. Just a little bit of fun to see how well your love for EPFL is and how well you know the UN SDGs that we're focusing on for Showcase 2030. So we have a guess for B, which was proposed by Colombia and Guatemala, originated during the Rio 20 summit in 2012. Someone thinks, well, kind of fishy. Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. And so with that, I'm going to give you the answer. It is D. It was the last one. It's 17 goals, 169 targets, and 247 indicators. I hope you enjoyed that little bit of trivia. And with that, I'm going to swiftly move forward to our wonderful, amazing speakers coming in. The executive director at Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch, for those who do not know, operates with 100 governments worldwide. And this particular gentleman has been the CEO for the last 28 years. Everything from international justice to dealing with autocratic populism to foreign policy development of the major powers, working for the UN. Last time, actually, he's been at EPFL a lot. And the last time he shared a panel with Yuval Harari, who is an author that I've been really enjoying. And I was emailing him about this before he joined today, and he's about to join on screen. But he actually said, and this is a true story, that his journey in human rights began with a haircut. So at some point, you're going to have to ask him about that. But for now, please welcome onto our screen the amazing Kenneth Roth. Over to you.
Thanks, Don. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to be back, even if it's only virtually, at EPFL. I've been asked to talk about technology and human rights. And as you can expect, technology in human rights terms can be a force for good or a force for evil. And I'll touch a little bit on each of those during my brief comments right now, and then welcome your questions and comments here as well. First, some of the good. I mean, it's obvious that technology helps to connect people without some of the traditional intermediaries. And so, there's no longer a need for a journalist to pick up your concern. You can just get on social media and broadcast it yourself. Anybody with a smartphone can do that. Anybody can take a picture and make it be visible around the world. We're seeing that, today in Nigeria, where President Buhari has shut down Twitter. Why? Well, the approximate cause was because it removed one of his incendiary tweets. But the real reason is that the Nigerian people have been using Twitter to push back against the government. There was something known as the End SARS movement, all on Twitter, which was about curtailing a highly abusive police force known as SARS. This form of popular mobilization, which can be very powerful, which governments have to listen to. We've seen it from the Tahrir Square movement in Egypt through to the Hong Kong pro-democracy movement to today in Myanmar, where people are extremely active on social media. When it's too dangerous to go on the streets, people are getting shot, but they're using social media to push back against the junta and its coup. Now, what's interesting is that it's not easy to shut this down because governments are discovering that many of their officials use social media as well. They can't shut down the internet because businesses are dependent on it. And so there's this kind of cat and mouse game where governments try to limit access to social media, limit access to the internet, but they have to do it in a limited way. And it often doesn't work. People are very creative. Even China, with its Great Firewall, finds that people learn how to substitute characters, use euphemisms, use abbreviations, and get past the censors to get their message heard. So, this is a way in which social media has greatly enhanced communication among ourselves and allows, anybody to spotlight misconduct, misbehavior, to be a whistleblower. And you don't have to convince a journalist to write about it. You can be your own journalist. Now, let me give another example where technology has been extremely useful within my organization, and that is for the conduct of investigations. And I want to give an example here from Syria's Idlib province, which is the area in northwestern Syria that is today the only part of Syria still held by the armed opposition. And there are 3 million civilians sitting in Idlib, mostly along the Turkish border, trying to get out. Turkey has blocked the border. But they, until last March 2020, were daily subjected to very deliberate bombardment by Russian and Syrian jets. And my organization was very determined to try to stop this. And we spent a lot of time putting pressure on Putin via Germany, via France, via Turkey. But we've also been investigating ourselves. And I want to give you an example of the kind of investigation that technology makes possible. we were not able to get into Idlib. Usually we conduct investigations by sending our researchers on the ground to the site of the crime, but Turkey was not letting anybody in or out. So we had to do the entire investigation remotely. And what we wanted to do was to look at the practice of the Russian and Syrian bombers of not just accidentally, occasionally hitting some civilian institution, but deliberately bombing hospitals, schools, marketplaces, apartment buildings, designed to make Idlib unlivable so that people would flee and it would be easier for the Syrian troops to come in and take over. So we focused on 46 incidents. And in each of these, we couldn't get there. So we collected photographs and videos from social media. People post all the time. And there's, today technology makes it quite possible to scrape social media and to, collect visuals that seem like they might be relevant. But of course, anybody can put garbage on social media as well. So you need to verify. You have to cross-reference different photos and videos. And ultimately, we use satellite imagery as a very important cross-check because you know that the satellite imagery is true. We have a partnership with Planet, the San Francisco-based company that sends up these micro satellites that take a photograph of the entire globe every single day. And with their partnership, they give us really whatever we need. And so we asked for a bunch of satellite images of these 46 locales in Idlib. And we were able to show exactly what happened, from one day to the next as the bombing took place. But then you need to say, well, how do you know that this was a deliberate bombing of, say, a hospital? How do you know that there wasn't, an opposition, a rebel military force right outside that they were really trying to hit? So we then had to speak to 113 witnesses and victims, again, principally using WhatsApp or Signal or various encrypted messaging to ask them. So tell us what was going on at the time of this bombing. And we were able to show that there were no legitimate military targets at these 46 sites. Instead, what was happening was this was a deliberate attack on civilian institutions, a war crime. Then the question is, who did it? And so we went to logs that Syrian opposition figures keep of every single plane that takes off from an airport in northern Syria. And they write down the tail number, the time, and we were able to determine which plane bombed which site. And then using open source material out of Russia, we were able to determine the chain of command. And so when we put out a report, we could say, this plane bombed this hospital. This was the general in charge. Here was his boss. And in essence, we were creating a case for the prosecution when that becomes possible. And indeed, Germany, using the concept of universal jurisdiction, has been prosecuting people. So this is a potential for justice. It also, we hope, is a deterrent because it says to the Russians in particular, we're onto you. You're not going to cover this up. So if you keep this up, we've got your name. And the good news is that since March 2020, this bombing has stopped. We've now gone, 16 months without the deliberate targeting of hospitals and schools and the like. So, this is Syria. We never know how long it'll last, but that's 16 months where the people of northwestern Syria have not had to live in terror of being bombed by Russian and Syrian jets. So these are examples of how technology can be very much for the good. But I also want to highlight, as you would expect me, a number of areas where technology is a challenge. And here I'm sure we'll have more to discuss when we open this up for Q&A. But, I think most of this will be familiar to you, but, let's begin with social media. We know that social media uses algorithms that tend to accentuate extremist content because the algorithm is all about maximizing engagement. The more people engage, the more they keep clicking, the more money the social media companies make. And so there is an incentive for them to promote incendiary material. We need to push them to push back, to resist this pure profit motive, and to recognize the real world consequences of social media posts. Now, today, the major companies all recognize this responsibility, but the question is, what are they doing about it? And we've seen that despite the gazillions of dollars that they are taking in, they still are trying to do the monitoring of hate speech and other promotion of evil on social media. They're trying to do it on the cheap. They often don't really invest in the linguistic skills that they need, in the cultural understanding that they need to understand the code words, to understand the slang, to understand, the way people convey messages, not just in English or French or German, those are the easy ones, but in Burmese, in the places where these things tend to explode. And indeed, Facebook, which at the time had not invested in this significantly, was a major cause behind the hatred that led to the massive ethnic cleansing, the crimes against humanity against Rohingya Muslims several years ago, sending 730,000 into Bangladesh and the murder of about 10,000. So that's one example where there's a real need for scrutiny. There's a real need to push back against technology. We're all aware of how the platforms overall, and not just social media here, vacuum up our data. Often with little meaningful consent. I mean, there always these days are these consent forms, but basically, if you want to use the device, you gotta consent. Nobody bothers to read the lengthy legalese. And so far, the tools that would make consent meaningful, such as data portability. Can I move my data from Facebook to Twitter to Instagram or whatever? That's just not there. The interoperability, the ability to kind of move easily from one platform to another, not there. So as a result, this plays out in the manipulation of us, because they use this data to figure out, who are you? What ad might you be attracted to? What political movement might you be attracted to? And so, this is not just, pure profit. This is really, using our data to manipulate us in ways that we're often not even aware of. So there's much more work that needs to be done in this area. Now, one emerging and increasingly important area is artificial intelligence. And here, there are real questions about, what is going on behind the scenes? Do we have the transparency to know where there are problems? And so, let's just take the issue of biases in algorithms. Now, artificial intelligence has become, the latest craze, for example, in deploying police forces. So, why just, go on the basis of your sense of where the crime is? Why don't use an algorithm to figure out where the crime was and then deploy your police there? It makes sense if you think about it superficially, except that if the police already have been deployed in a discriminatory way, say that they're deployed more often to the minority area, the racial minority, the ethnic minority, and when they're deployed there, they find more crime. Then the algorithm tells you that that's the high crime neighborhood. So they send them back. And you see this sort of self-reinforcing bias where the people who tend to get the bottom end of the deal are the ones who were originally the source of bias to begin with. You see something similar where algorithms are used for bail. There was this reform movement in the United States. Let's not just depend on judges with their biases to set bail. Let's do this scientifically. We're going to use AI. What do they use for AI? The same kind of data the police are using. So, they ask, does this person come from a high crime neighborhood? Are they more likely to be a recidivist if we release them? That reflects the biased police deployment in the first place. And so again, if you're an ethnic or racial minority, you're more likely to be kept in prison, not given bail. And once you're stuck in prison pre-trial, you're under enormous pressure to plead guilty and not to contest your innocence. So we have, a lot to do to fight against the old classic concept of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, when it comes to artificial intelligence. And the only way to do that is through, transparency and really testing how these algorithms play out in real life situations, which typically, especially when it's a commercial company behind the AI, they claim proprietary interest and they don't want to open things up. Now, in the realm of surveillance, another area where there's been enormous advance for good and evil, there are big problems with respect to the right to privacy. In the United States, for example, they still have the view that unless you are a US citizen or a non-US citizen who is in the United States, you have no right to privacy with respect to the US government. So that means, EPFL students, unless you happen to be a US citizen, there you are in Lausanne, the US government takes the view that you have no right to privacy. You can snoop on everything. It can listen in on the content of your phone conversations, read your emails. That's the view. Or there are governments like China or Russia, which of course just ignore the right to privacy altogether. Europe is much further ahead, but Europe does not control the European space when it comes to surveillance. So we have a lot to do to try to bolster the right to privacy as a global protection, not just a narrow nation by nation protection. Another example where surveillance is really pushing us right now is that one way around the surveillance has been end-to-end encryption. And so, that's a lot of the attraction of WhatsApp or Signal. But a number of governments are saying, well, wait a minute, the criminals are using end-to-end encryption. We need to create a backdoor, in essence, a vulnerability, so we can listen in if something comes up. But of course, there is no such thing as a vulnerability that only the good guys will exploit. And so if you create a backdoor and give the key to, your local law enforcement agent, you can make sure that the Chinese and the Russians and many others are going to, figure out that key as well. And indeed, to make matters worse, the Australian and the British governments are today actively pressing the major end-to-end encryptors to introduce this kind of vulnerability. So this is a very real life threat that we need to combat. Final point I'll make, technology, really has enormous power. We're seeing this as it becomes, more pervasive in our lives. But I think we have to recognize that the technology companies are way ahead of the governments. That government regulators are just, not up to par when it comes to understanding the latest innovation, figuring out what meaningful reforms would be. And this is where people like you, people like the EPFL community have a critical role to play. Because yes, you can be tomorrow's, tech entrepreneur, but I hope that some of you will also play the role of watchdog and to be tomorrow's tech scrutinizer. Because we need the savviest people possible who are helping to figure out how do we keep technology principally as a force for good and minimize the way in which it can be a force for evil. We cannot count on governments to act on their own when they don't really know how to fight back. Today, the battle is by no means even. And we need to figure out a way to enhance government regulators to play a better role in curtailing some of the overreach that we frequently see by the technology companies. And the EPFL community has an absolutely essential role to play in that process. So thank you very much, and I welcome your questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. That's got to be one of the most thorough analyses and some amazing prime examples of how technology can be used for good and for bad. So thank you so much for taking us through that. We don't have a lot of time for questions, so I'm going to jump into one that's right at the very top, and it's been voted the highest, and it says, I have read your report on China's crimes against humanity targeting Uyghurs. Can you give us an update on where you stand regarding this?
Sure. Well, I mean, just by way of background, I think most people know that the Chinese government, since about 2017, has been locking up Uyghur and other Turkic Muslims in Xinjiang, the northwestern region of China. It has detained on the order of 1 million of these Turkic Muslims, essentially to force them to abandon Islam, to abandon their culture, to speak Mandarin rather than Turkic. Nothing like this has happened in decades. It is an outrageous crime against humanity. The issue, though, is, this is China, and nobody likes to stand up to China because they're economically powerful. So our strategy really has been twofold. One is to gradually get governments to condemn China. And even though nobody likes to speak out by themselves, we've been able to show them that there's a certain safety in numbers. And working principally with Germany, the UK, and the United States, we now have 40 governments that have joined together to speak out against Xinjiang. This number is gradually growing. And China is very sensitive to this because it's a dictatorship. It doesn't hold elections. So, it doesn't have domestic legitimacy in that sense. And it looks to kind of external validation for legitimization. And if we can deprive it of that legitimization, that hurts. Amazingly, dictators care about this. The other thing that we're doing is that, because of this pressure, China has been slowly closing some of these detention centers, but simply moving the Uyghurs into forced labor. Hardly a lot better. But this forced labor creates a brand new issue because, many companies source from China in their supply chains. And because Chinese supply chains are completely opaque, there's no way to know what's going on. They don't allow independent monitoring. Suddenly they're vulnerable. Xinjiang is known foremost for the export of cotton, tomatoes, and polysilicon of the sort that is used for solar panels. And these supply chains now, you simply cannot export from Xinjiang without becoming complicit in forced labor. And as more companies are recognizing that, it's putting economic pressure as well on Beijing. So these are some of the tools we're using to try to address really what is one of the world's worst crimes today.
Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing. Thank you also for your endorsement for the amazing researchers, technology, innovation, everything else that's happening at EPFL and campuses around the world in the hands of individuals. Like you said, we all have to play watchdog. We all have to drive innovation to use it for good. And so whether it's a student, whether it's a corporate, whether it's an investor, whoever it is that's watching, thank you for empowering everyone, instilling in us a greater sense of mission and purpose for the better of the whole world and not just ourselves. So Kenneth, thank you so much for being a part of Showcase 2030. Really enjoyed having you here. All right, take care. Goodbye. And so with that, I would like to now put on the spot Julia and Ale from Tech for Impact to maybe tag team off what Kenneth said. What is the future of Tech for Impact? What is the future of technology as we've been focusing here on Showcase 2030? So I'm going to give the screen to them for a few minutes here before we wrap up for the day.
Hi, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And we won't take much time. We just wanted, now that this official panel concludes, we wanted to thank all the speakers, all the panelists, all the fireside chatters, you, Dan, and our amazing team, our tech team, Yannick, our tech support. We want to thank all of you for two great days. It all wouldn't have been possible without you. And we wanted to also use the next 2 minutes to tell you that we still have amazing workshops coming up, but it's our last chance to interact with all of you. We won't take a break this summer because actually we will be launching another cool project this summer, which is our first virtual summer school. And we invite all of you to stay tuned what is happening here at Tech for Impact. And I'll let Ale quickly introduce what is happening on our summer school this summer.
Yes, thank you, Julia. As Julia said, we are continuing the work at Tech for Impact also during this summer. Even though it's vacations, actually, it's for a lot of our students are going to be, learning throughout. So I'm just going to quickly open here a presentation that I have to show you a bit of what we're doing. Basically, we're starting a summer school actually in 2 weeks. So in no time, our summer school is a 6-week virtual program for students in which they're going to develop innovative, unsustainable entrepreneur solutions for challenges in the global south. And what is their motivation? I'm here showing a couple of quotes that our students gave us. They're interested in finding solutions. It's time to act. They feel responsible. They want to contribute to improving living conditions in vulnerable communities. They want to build their skills. They want to interact with others and be really connected to a community that helps, better in the world. We have 3 objectives, develop rounded, validated concepts, learn main concepts of sustainable entrepreneurship and user-centric design, and develop teamworks and all these intercultural skills. And in our summer school, basically, we have an array of NGOs, actually many of those who are going to be giving master classes in just a couple of minutes at 3 p.m. And they have presented 10 different challenges. You can see a couple of examples here, super interesting ones, from refugee camps to, how to account in land tenure and, global maps that our students are going to be working out throughout these 6 weeks of journey. Each week, of course, focusing on a different concept that we're learning. And we have, a mix of schedules of workshops, of team mentorships, reviews, and community. The good thing also is that for this summer school, we have partners. We are working with the Mohammed Polytechnic University in Morocco, with UTech in Peru, and ETH for from Zurich. And we're welcoming our first cohort. We have 40 students out of 160 applications this time, bachelor, master students, 19 different universities, and 22 different nationalities. So we're super excited to start this work. The students are excited, and we cannot wait to start. This being said, and our last message from Tech for Impact side is that we're super excited also to be now recruiting. We actually have an open position now at Tech for Impact. We are going to be recruiting for a junior sustainable entrepreneurship manager. We are who's going to be also helping us manage the summer school, the Changemakers program, and other activities that we're doing at Tech for Impact, everything related to sustainable entrepreneurship. So whoever is interested, please do not hesitate to reach out to us and join us potentially.
And with that, we just wanted to have one last message, and this is the Tech for Impact team that managed to get out of the tech background backstage. And I want to introduce Bea and Antoine. We're missing a couple of our team members, but we wanted to quickly show you the Tech for Impact team as we're approaching the end of the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and back to you, Dan.
All right, so hopefully we'll get me back on the screen. Let's do one thing before you guys go. Can we, oops, I disappeared off the screen. Do you see how I have all these boxes? Do you guys have any of these UN SDG boxes? Can you go grab it?
We just lost our boxes in the running of everything, but we can tell you our favorite SDGs.
We take your boxes in the background then.
You take ours. Actually, let's do a quick screenshot and a picture of the amazing team that put this all together. Smile, everyone, and we'll just grab this. Excellent. All right, I'll go back to frame one and I'll say goodbye to you guys. Thank you so much for all the incredible work that you have done behind the scenes to make Showcase 2030 what it is. And I just want to point out, we still do have another hour of masterclasses up ahead. We've got student engagement in sustainability. I know there were some questions about that. How do students get involved? Well, there's a masterclass on that. The do's and don'ts on clean tech and project funding, collaboration across industry cultures, make it count beyond just carbon counting and carbon credits and the pilot phases. So much more masterclasses, plus networking, plus a virtual booths on startups, still to go. So although this whole showcase part of it is done, we still have more on the showcase elements on the platform. From my end, Dan Ram, it's been a real honor and pleasure to be with you. I really hope that next time we can be in person, but more importantly, I hope that we're further on these amazing SDG goals that we as a world have agreed on. To everyone who's watched, thank you so much. For everyone on the tech teams here in India and in Switzerland, and everyone who's been involved in putting this together, thank you so much. It's been amazing. Take care, stay well, and see you next time. Goodbye.